Torah Bontrager is the author of a memoir, An Amish Girl in Manhattan, escaping at age 15, breaking all the rules, and feeling safe again. And she is the first Amish person to graduate from an Ivy League college. But while Torah now works with entrepreneurs and leaders to make the world safer for women, the Me Too movement age has had no impact on the culture of her birth. There has not been a single female leader in the 300 plus years of Amish history, and sexual violence is rampant. Torah will share her story and the wisdom she has gathered on her journey. It is my pleasure to introduce Torah Bontrager.
Does this sound good? Can you hear me? Oh, the mic has to be here? Okay. And I'm just going to test the pointer thingy. Where's Alex? Oh, there you are. Does this work? Okay. There we go. Awesome. Hi, everyone. I am Torah Bontrager, and I just want to say, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me. I feel beyond honored to be here today. I actually hadn't even heard of SNAP until about half a year ago, and I couldn't believe that you've been around for 30 years. Today is my first time to speak in person for an audience of sexual assault survivors. How that makes me feel to be in a room full of fellow survivors is overwhelming. I'm overwhelmed with gratitude. Gratitude because for the first time I'm at an event where every single person gets it. Today with Me Too, lots of people are feeling that way for the first time, where we feel that we're not alone. But to experience this in person is just another level of gratitude to that. So thank you again for having me here. So I'm a recurring rape survivor, and I learned about SNAP when I was looking for other survivors who were willing to share their stories with me publicly. Others who had somehow managed to figure out meaning or create meaning in their lives in the aftermath of what happened to them. So I was doing an online search specifically for Mennonite survivors, and that's how I found Cameron Altaras, who introduced me to Barbara Graber, who's here today. And I'm curious, how many of you have heard of the Amish? Just a show of hands. Woo! That's like the first time when I speak to someone everybody knows. And I'm guessing you also know about the Mennonites because of Barbara. So, okay, I was born and raised Old Order Amish, and I literally escaped in the middle of the night when I was 15. So I left with only what I could carry, which were the clothes on my back and $170 in my pocket. I didn't know if I'd ever see my parents, siblings, relatives, or community members again. And today I'm the first and so far only first-generation Amish person to graduate from an Ivy League school. That was in Columbia University in New York City, where I got my BA in philosophy with a focus on Tibetan Buddhism. So I'll just show you a few pictures. Here's me at age 15. So that was taken 2 days after my escape. Those were the clothes I wore the night I escaped. Oh, and incidentally, that's also the only picture I have of me as an Amish kid because we're not allowed cameras. That could be me when I was a little Amish girl. The style of dresses, the way that we dressed, and there are different rules for different types of Amish. You can tell by the clothing style what level or sort of status of Amish you are. Here's the backs of Amish people, Amish adults at an auction, I believe. That's very symbolic to see pictures of them with their backs only. Again, we're not allowed to pose for the camera, but also in terms of how isolated we are, how we shun the outside world. I just feel that's such a symbolic photo And then down here are Amish farmers in using horses, draft horses to do the farming. Whole bunch of buggies. This is the style of buggy that I grew up with. This is a Pennsylvania style. Again, these rules dictate or let other people know within the Amish what sort of Amish church or community, specific community you belong to. And here's a typical sign on the highway in Amish country. This is another picture here that I picked because, once again, it's just so unusual and yet typical. I mean, it reminds me of myself when I was a child, where I would sit in the back seat of the buggy looking back out at the cars behind me and wondering what it was like to not be Amish, what it was like to live this other exotic life. And then just, I grew up with no electricity, no cars, no internet, no cell phones. Although I did have access to a phone later when we lived in a community that allowed it. Here's me later on in life where I got my pilot license. I actually got it at a Mennonite college. So I went there first. I had to graduate towards getting out of the Amish and Mennonite. And that's not me, but that's a picture of one of the flights I did, flying upside down. And that's New York City, Statue of Liberty, that just, once again, is highly symbolic for me, my pursuit of personal sovereignty and liberty. And Columbia. And this is how I live today. I live in this great big city, New York. I avoid Times Square at all costs. I get around in a subway train. And that's my little birdies. They're my children. They're helping me write my book or other work that I do. And then that's what Karen introduced you to, the theme for today. Okay, so I haven't memorized the rest of my speech, so I'm going to just pretend like this is a book reading or something. For as long as I can remember, I endured some form of abuse or another. Physical, verbal, emotional, psychological, spiritual, religious, and sexual. I got this from my parents, Henry and Ida Bontrager, and other relatives and community members. And so at the age of 11, I made the conscious decision to leave. That led to 4 years of planning a way out and included a failed first attempt. New York City and Columbia marked the beginning or the turning point from my surviving life to thriving in life. But before I got there, I endured even more abuse. During my last year pre-escape, I'd call Harvey Bell. We called him Harv. And I did that after my parents and siblings were asleep. Harv was my father's oldest brother, and he had also escaped when he was a teen. I trusted him completely. He was the only person I knew by whom I felt understood. I'd crawl out of the bathroom window at night and run out to the phone in the barn. Never once did it occur to me that I wouldn't be safe with him. Within a month of arriving at his house, Harv began raping me repeatedly. The morning after the first night, he bought my silence with a death threat. If you ever tell anyone, I'll kill you. I didn't dare resist subsequent attacks from him. The only way to save my life was to endure the rapes until I could figure out a way to escape. Instead of being free after getting away from my parents, I found myself trapped once again, a child held hostage, alone in the world, and not safe around adults. I jumped out of a frying pan of parental abuse and into a fire of routine sexual assault. I couldn't protect myself no matter where I went. 6 months later, during winter break from high school, I figured out a way to escape from Harv with my physical life intact. I moved to my uncle Enos Bontrager, who had also left the Amish church. I thought I'd be safe with him. He was married and had 3 kids. Harv had been divorced. However, when I was there with Enos, as soon as his wife Barb left for an overnight business trip, Enos raped me too, and that too became a recurring routine whenever Barb was gone. At night after each rape, I'd cry myself to sleep. Heartbroken and betrayed, I'd ask, why is God letting this happen to me? I don't deserve to be raped. Why isn't God protecting me? I'm a good person, and I did the right thing to get away from the Amish church and my abusive parents. Why are even more bad things happening to me now? My quest to find answers for why bad things happen to good people took me through nearly 30 countries, a 3-year break from college, and a philosophy degree. I studied many interpretations of Christianity and major religions of the world. Ultimately, no belief system satisfied me. By the time I transferred into Colombia, Buddhism was the last on my list to inspect. For the next 4 years, I studied under Professor Robert Thurman, who was the foremost Western scholar on Tibetan Buddhism and a personal friend of the Dalai Lama. I resonated with Buddhism, but in the end, I felt I hit a blank wall. Enlightenment was based on a belief that was unprovable. Further, the teaching of karma went against what was personally true for me. I didn't subscribe to the notion that killing someone or something is the worst possible sin or crime. Rape was far worse. I also didn't subscribe to the notion that those who committed heinous crimes against me in this lifetime would pay the consequences for their actions in a future lifetime, if not in this one. What good did that do me or the rest of the world? Where was my justice? What about all the innocent children or other victims that these sexual predators would destroy because they were allowed to roam free on this planet? What about the safety of society in general? Waiting for some future lifetime for justice made no sense. To me, waiting on karma was no different from the Amish saying, turn the other cheek, don't make them pay for their actions, forgive them, which means forget. God will punish them in hell when they die. Well, if the predators even went to hell, that didn't do anything in terms of justice and restitution for the victims, which they should deserve for their lifelong, they should have justice and restitution for their lifelong terror and trauma. What I came to realize is that rape is a weapon of war and a practice that's sanctioned and kept alive by political, religious, and social institutions, particularly by upstanding citizens. It isn't some hazy force of nature or karma that just happens and can't be stopped. Sexual assault as a culture is an intentional strategic weapon embedded in all structures of society in the effort by those in power to continue maintaining that power and control. This practice of rape, to me, is terrorism, and it needs to be stopped in this lifetime. That's not easy at all because it means holding upstanding citizens accountable. All of the perpetrators from my early childhood abuse are considered upstanding citizens of their community. Harv's last known location, to my knowledge, is Alder or Sheridan, Montana, and/or Alaska. Enos and Barb's last known location is Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. They actually moved there to try to escape the charges that Enos is having filed against him by one of his other victims right now. My parents, Henry and Ida, still live in Ovid, Michigan. They resigned from the Amish church after I escaped and converted to right-wing fundamentalist Christianity. They run an orphanage located in Guatemala, and they deny that I was raped. Likewise, none of my siblings believe that I was raped. All of them protect Harv and Enos, and among other things, they say that I'm an embarrassment to the family. I have no contact with them because of this. So today, the myth that I want to dispel is that we Amish are peaceful, gentle folk. How many of you have heard that term? Yeah. What the outside doesn't see is the reality behind that peaceful, gentle folk facade. There are many things that I appreciate about my birth culture. Unlike a lot of escapees, I haven't thrown the baby out with the bathwater. I appreciate the fact that I still speak fluent Amish, even after over 20 years of not being around Amish speakers. Learning a second language at an early age, in this case English, is one of the things I value the most about my heritage. I also appreciate the fact that I grew up learning how to grow my own food, and that I can easily and comfortably survive without electricity, internet, running water, indoor bathroom, and other modern conveniences. What I don't appreciate, that's funny. Thank you. I love technology too, though, I have to say. I won't give that up willingly. What I don't appreciate and what needs to change is everything that plagues mainstream society. We Amish are not exempt from issues. The problems seen in the world at large are amplified inside my culture. The reason for that is because we've kept ourselves isolated. That creates all sorts of nearly insurmountable challenges, particularly given that we Amish, as we currently exist, are patriarchal, deny our children a higher education, and use religious terrorism to prevent members from speaking out. So how do you change a culture when no one on the outside sees the problems? How do you escape such a world as a little girl who doesn't even speak English very well and who isn't supposed to become more than ever obeying her husband and producing 9, 10, 14 kids? When I was 11, again, that's when I made the conscious decision to leave, because at that point I realized that simply by virtue of having been born a female, I'd never have a voice inside the Amish. I'd never be allowed to fulfill my dreams, and I'd never be recognized for my talents and abilities simply because I was a girl, for no other reason than that. In the Amish, women are relegated to second-class citizenship at best. It's so bad that the woman has to promise on her wedding day to literally obey her husband for the rest of her life. The only time the woman is allowed to break that vow is if the husband leaves the church and the woman stays. That's because one's vow to remain a practicing member of the church supersedes all other vows. So how many of you feel that you understand the connection between the Amish and the Mennonites? Oh, good, finally. In short, the briefest way to explain it, the Amish are religious cousins of the Mennonites. Some guy, a minister named Jacob Ammon, broke away from the Mennonites in the late 1600s in Switzerland over some petty theological dispute. It seriously was very petty. That's how we Amish got started. The Mennonites ranged from as conservative as getting around in horses and buggies to dressing just like you and I, and with no technological and higher educational restrictions, and some even are LGBTQ welcoming and accepting women as pastors. The Amish, on the other hand, their range is from conservative to relatively modern, is contained within the parameters of horses and buggies, no electricity, and 8th grade only education, and speaking English as a second language. The most conservative of us have no running hot water, whereas the most liberal allow propane, gas refrigerators and stoves, and bikes as a mode of transportation. So at any rate, ever since Jacob Ammon, we Amish haven't had a single female in any leadership position, neither inside nor outside the church. That's 300 plus years of history, not a single female voice to represent us. Women are standing up in every sector of society in the Me Too age today, but we have yet to see movement on the Amish front. What I realized soon after my escape is that even though women in mainstream America have more freedom, in the end, the world is still run on patriarchy. What happens inside the Amish is a reflection of the whole. We're a microcosm of mainstream society. We're not peaceful, gentle folk. We're just like you with good and bad. And among other issues, rape culture runs rampant inside our homes and in our schools and is perpetrated by bishops and ministers as well as non-clergy. Perhaps the most powerful illustration for just how ill-regarded, how little valued we women are, is that when a baptized female member is raped and it actually somehow gets in front of the church elders, the female member has to ask the male rapist to forgive her for having tempted him. And she has to do this in front of the entire congregation of baptized members. Yes. It's the girl's fault that the male raped her. Outside of learning to love ourselves and being proud of ourselves, the biggest challenge we survivors in all cultures face is holding the perpetrators accountable. This stems from a lack of financial stability and legal aid, especially for us Amish. As survivors, most of us don't have any financial resources to fight legal battles. Most of us live paycheck to paycheck, and when we do get to the point of being able to talk about what happened, exorbitant amounts of dollars go into just trying to find the right therapists and medicines and tools to deal with the flashbacks and regain some semblance of a functional and possibly meaningful life. Health insurance doesn't cover PTSD for sexual assault survivors, at least not in my experience. And there are very few therapists who accept insurance who are qualified and experienced in specifically helping survivors, sexual assault survivors. I've heard story after story of survivors being re-traumatized by unqualified therapists. I myself have suffered from that. None of the health professionals who help me today are covered by my insurance. Health insurance doesn't cover any of the medicines that work for me, for example, ketamine infusions. Insurance companies claim it's a designer drug and refuse to acknowledge that it's literally necessary for my survival. Ketamine is actually something that's helped a lot of early childhood sexual assault abuse survivors. So between having a health insurance system that denies us our right to live and a criminal justice system that denies us our right to justice, how on earth are we ever going to put an end to rape culture? For us Amish, there isn't a central governing authority like the Vatican, Pope, or Catholic Church institution with money that we can hold liable for what the church is allowing to happen. Lawyers don't want to take my cases against my uncles because there's no source or fund for them to recoup their efforts. I've been looking for over 8 years for attorneys to handle my cases and other Amish survivors' cases, but I can't find anyone. Between battling for my psychological health, providing for myself financially, trying to get justice through the criminal justice system, and I say criminal justice in quote system, and then not even being able to go through the civil lawsuit process because there's no funding, well, these things add to the injustice and betrayals already committed. I'm an Ivy League graduate. I speak fluent English. I've traveled to around 30 countries. I'm an airplane pilot. I've written a memoir. I'm a marketing consultant. I've found a solid support system. I have a chosen family and a city that loves me. I've accomplished this long list of impossibles, things that should never have happened given my childhood. And still, I've wanted to kill myself multiple times in the recent past because nothing exists to help Amish survivors. Leaders are people who figure out a way when there is no way. When I was a child, I fought the male bullies on the playground throughout my entire 8th grade education because in my eyes, it wasn't right that the little kids got picked on and the teachers and parents just looked the other way. No one did anything about it, and I couldn't just turn a blind eye to what was happening. I got into trouble all the time for fighting the bullies. Torah is the troublemaker. Torah is the one who's causing the problems. Torah is a girl, such shameful behavior for a girl to fight a boy. I didn't stop. I got smarter. I figured out better tactics and strategies to fight back so that I'd minimize the risks of getting seen and reported by the teachers and then punished by my parents. In my last year, 8th grade, I even ended up fighting my male teacher. That was a beyond scandalous, outrageous move. How dare a student, especially a girl, fight her teacher, especially a male teacher, who incidentally had been hired to specifically crack down on the troublemaker in school, me. One of my mentors pointed out to me recently that I was branded the troublemaker, not because I was the one causing the problems, but because I brought attention to the existing problems. I had far less resources and knowledge as a female Amish child than I do today, and if she could fight when there was no hope, then surely I, as an adult, can figure out a way to hold my uncles and parents accountable for their crimes. Even if everyone else tells me it's impossible or lists all the reasons for why there's no hope for pursuing restitution and other forms of justice, I will figure out a way. I can read law books, I can make my own case, I can file my own paperwork, I can market my story, I can crowdfund. I just won't let it go away. I've survived death threats, attacks on my life, extreme poverty, and suicide attempts. I can figure out a way to make my voice heard and get the message across that looking the other way is not acceptable and that it's no longer business as usual. And believe me, sexual assault, sexual violence is a business. Change always, thank you. Change always has to come from within, and no matter how many people there are on the outside who want to help us Amish, someone from the inside has to step up and take the lead. And it needs to be a woman who is leading by example. I'm incredibly inspired by Barbara Blaine, who founded SNAP and took on the Catholic Church on behalf of survivors to disrupt an entire niche, a powerful niche of rampant sexual assault. I'm so grateful to have her and SNAP as an example to model after, knowing that you exist and that I can ask for help from all of you who have gone before makes the battle less lonely. To know that I'm not alone, that others who come from religiously sanctioned sexual assault institutions really get what's happening inside my culture is the most amazing and invigorating feeling ever, really. Thank you for inviting me here, for giving me the opportunity to share my story, and for paving the way to make it easier for those of us behind. Thank you. Thank you. I don't know if I have question time left or not. Oh, and I just wanted to say too, I'm available in the back afterwards if people have questions or want to know how to stay in touch. And oh, yes, you have a question?
Well, exactly. I think the quiet in the room, we're all stunned and amazed at your grit.
Thank you. Yes.
You mentioned that there is no kind of hierarchical structure, and control structure as there is in Catholicism. Is there something at all similar? Are there senior members of communities that interact in some way? What goes on to provide that kind of coherence?
Yeah, that's something that I'm investigating and have been for quite some years. Several years ago, someone mentioned to me, another fellow Amish escapee and survivor, that there's apparently a delegation, an Amish delegation that goes to the White House every year. So I've never heard of this, but I did hear of there being a steering committee when I was a little bit younger, and what I got at the time from that, what I gathered was that that steering committee makes the rules for the Amish in general. That said, you know, every church has its own bishop, and they make their own rules, but within certain churches, they sort of have agreements with each other, and they sort of have communion together kind of thing within, you know, whatever the rules that are similar. But apparently the steering committee is sort of, would be the equivalent of a central governing authority. But it's denied that it exists, that there is such a thing, and of course you want to deny it so you can, you know, you can't be held accountable. So what I'm working at is finding out who these members are, these current existing members, and seeing how we can do something like maybe a class action against multiple offenders, and I'm exploring different ways of approaching it. Yes?
One thing that I've noticed with the Catholics, I was raised in the Baptist church, but the Catholics very commonly, when there's an issue of molestation, they would go to the priest or the bishop.
Yeah, nothing ever gets to the outside because the Amish appreciate, they enjoy an autonomy that basically it's like they're their own country. They have agreements with the local non-Amish, mainstream authority that if any of their kids get into trouble or anything gets reported, that the police redirect it to the bishop and that we'll handle it. And we know how that goes. Yes, Barbara.
So what does happen if somebody takes the fact that somebody is sexually abusing a minor child, discloses to a bishop? Is there a process that they build in that they usually handle it? How do they handle it? They handle it internally?
Yeah, they don't handle it. If it's a child, well, it never, usually children, cases of abused children don't get to the bishop. It's only baptized members, because then once you're baptized, now you have to ask for permission, for forgiveness from the male perpetrator. If you're,
That's the only process they have.
yeah, outside of that, it's basically, the bishop is probably a perpetrator himself. And nobody wants to, I don't know quite how to explain it other than it's very similar to, what we know about the Catholic institutions, the same types of attitudes. Yeah.
I also wonder if,
How do you get how do you get baptized? Is it a certain age or?
Yeah, so depending on what community you grow up in, you get baptized. You don't get baptized until you want to get married, and you can't get married until you're baptized. So that's like a prerequisite for marriage inside the Amish churches. You have to get baptized. Other communities, in an effort to retain control over the teenagers, to prevent them from going and breaking the rules and getting cars and partying or whatever, they really lobby the kids to get baptized as early as 16. Because once you're baptized and if you break the rules, then there's so much shame that the church can sort of hold over your head, kind of thing. Yes.
Two questions. I was in Montana for years, and we had the Hutterites, which I understand are somehow related.
Yes. Yeah.
You want to address that first?
Yeah. So the Hutterites are one of the Anabaptist members. So Anabaptist is a broad term that refers to people who came out of the Protestant Reformation in 1525 onward and believe that there's only one valid baptism, so one baptism. And the Hutterites and the Mennonites are two of those early Anabaptist groups, and then the Amish are the ones who split from the Mennonites.
And Baptists are as a whole too, which means basically, as I understand it, being in that tradition, that we do not believe in baptism. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's what Anabaptists did, is in baptism, as I understand it.
Yeah.
The other is, are you saying that these Amish communities and Hutterite communities are exempt from DHS ever doing an investigation? By state law?
DHS, you mean?
Department of Human Services can't come in by state law?
They're not exempt, but in terms of the law, they're not exempt, but they're exempt in terms of influence. I know of cases, like one case in particular, where the girl, someone named Mary Byler, actually had the knowledge that there is such a thing as child protective services. So first of all, we Amish kids don't even know what laws there are. We don't know that we're protected by law, just under as a U.S. citizen. But somehow she understood that there was such a thing as child protective services. She made a phone call to them to report the abuse, and she was being sexually and physically and verbally and all of that abuse. Child Protective Services never investigated because of this agreement, understanding, well, if we get any reports, we refer it to the bishop. Yeah, so the Child Protective Services, the police, there's all sorts of institutions that need to be held accountable. I mean, they're enabling this to happen. The problems are from inside and outside. And Yeah.
Is that correct? Because the church makes the case that it's a separation of church and state because they have a religious, that their religion is so enwrapped in that the rules that gives them some protection.
Yeah, so the question is if the Amish make an argument that they're exempt based on religious freedom. I would say, yes, that's how it started out years ago. And we can refer to Wisconsin versus Yoder, which was a case that in 1972, the Supreme Court ruled that the Amish could pull their kids out of high school and send them to their own schools, and there's no oversight. So everything can be argued based on that as a precedent. So I'm not familiar exactly how to argue back against that. I mean, that's another thing to present. But what the big thing to keep in mind is that if we are able to hold the Amish accountable and say, no, you can't abuse. Oh, I need to stop. I'm going to finish my sentence. You can't abuse in the name of religion. Then that's going to mean all these other religious institutions and so forth now can be held accountable as well. So it's very big, this whole issue. Thank you.